Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about a tool that has completely transformed the way I plan and navigate my hikes, AllTrails Plus. As a Trailheads ambassador and the organizer of the Yakima Valley Trekkers, I'm out on the trails a lot. One of my favorite features of AllTrails Plus is the ability to edit and create my own maps. Conditions change, fallen trees, washed out sections, or even a last-minute reroute. And with AllTrails Plus, I can adjust my route on the fly and share it with others so everyone stays informed and safe. AllTrails Plus also gives you offline maps, wrong turn alerts, and 3D trail previews to help you stay on track and make the most of your adventure. And the best part, you can get 30% off an AllTrails Plus membership with my exclusive link in the episode show notes. So whether you're planning your next big trek or just looking for a new trail to explore, AllTrails Plus has you covered. Check it out and let's hit the trail. Welcome to the Season 13 of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host, Ivan, and each week we're hitting the trail through conversations with extraordinary hikers from across the United States and beyond. Winter brings its own kind of magic to the outdoors. Quiet forests dusted in snow, frosty ridgelines glowing in soft morning light, and trails that ask us to slow down, bundle up, and move with intention. This season, I've had the privilege of sitting down with hikers whose stories reflect the same sense of resilience and wonder. From snow-covered summit pushes and cold weather camping lessons to mindful miles on peaceful winter trails, their voices remind us that adventure doesn't hibernate, it simply changes shape. So zip up your puffy, pour something warm into your mug, and get ready. Season 13 is here, and the conversations ahead are as bold, reflective, and inspiring as the winter landscape we love. In this episode of Hikes and Mikes, we're joined by Dr. Rob Scanlon, physician, backpacker, and author of Surviving the Trail, 5 essential skills to prepare every hiker for adventure's most common perils. With more than 2 decades of trail experience and a career in critical care medicine, Dr. Rob brings a rare and eye-opening perspective on the realities behind hiking accidents, rescues, and preventable emergencies. Rather than focusing on dramatic survival stories, Dr. Rob makes a powerful case for something far less glamorous, but far more important: preparation. We dive deep into the 5 critical variables every hiker must understand to stay safe in the backcountry: dehydration, body temperature regulation, falling, drowning, and getting lost. Throughout the conversation, Dr. Rob breaks down the subtle warning signs hikers often miss, the compounding risks of small mistakes, and why even experienced adventurers frequently underestimate hazards like weather shifts, navigation errors, and stream crossings. We explore the psychology of fear versus preparedness, the life-saving value of analog navigation skills, and how wilderness medicine reshapes decision-making under stress. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Dr. Rob. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really exciting guest with me today. He's a backpacker, hiker, physician, and also author of Surviving the Trail. Dr. Rob is joining us on the podcast. Really excited to speak with you, Dr. Rob, but we always like to start off by having our guests share a little bit about themselves and how they got started with the outdoors and hiking.
Well, first of all, Ivan, I want to thank you so much for having me on, and this is a really big honor. So, I'm both a hiker and practicing physician for over 20 years. I was a scout younger, in my life, but I didn't really begin hiking for me until I was back out in practice. And, it was just started off as just like a steam blowing session on Saturday or Sunday from a handful of people at the hospital, just for a little diversion. We went to Harriman State Park in lower New York State. For anybody who's out there listening knows the area. It was a great area. It's just the AT goes through there, and it's just a ton of trails, and there's always something new to walk on out there. And I just really started loving it. I just got hooked.
And like you mentioned, you've been hiking now for over 20 years, as well as practicing medicine in some of the most high-pressure situations imaginable. How did those two worlds kind of come together in your life?
Probably when I realized that becoming a professional hiker was not in the cards. I decided I wanted to meld what I had to do still for a living and what I love to do when I'm not working. So that became a jump into the wilderness medicine world. So it combines adventure with medicine. Somewhere in the 2000 teens, somewhere in there, I joined the Wilderness Medical Society and I started, I was reading the articles and going to the conferences, and that really started me getting further into the medical side of adventure and all the mishaps and all what can happen and what we do as wilderness medical practitioners, in the field to help these individuals. And wilderness medicine encompasses so much more than just in the field. It's medicine delivered in space, on ships for oceanography expeditions, and everywhere there is an austere environment. That's wilderness medicine. You got ER docs who are manning the one or two ERs in Antarctica, and whoever walks in, and you're having to deal with all kinds of different situations and having to rely on yourself rather than all the technology that comes with typical medicine. So it's a very exciting subject for me. But what became the impetus for what became this book?
Yeah, and if folks haven't had a chance, I do recommend picking up Surviving the Trail. Dr. Rob, one thing that you mentioned and I read was that you described writing the book as a moral obligation. What made this feel bigger than just another outdoor book?
Well, so that no other book was written on this particular subject. And, being a physician and knowing all the things that happen out there, and, many of which things we can't control. But if you look at all of the headlines that come to national news, other than the bear attacks and the rattlesnake bites, most of the deaths and rescues that you read about were all preventable. People have been following me along. Have heard me say that, the statistics are crazy. In an average week in North America, that's US and Canada, 10 hikers die and another 200 need rescue. And the vast majority of those instances, all preventable. And it's just a matter of who they're going to be next week and the following week and the following week. And so knowing the things that we can do for ourselves to prevent at least the most common ways that we could end up in that situation, again, I felt that moral obligation. You're like, I know this stuff, and these headlines are still coming and coming and coming. I could do something about this. I don't know if anyone's going to be interested in reading it, but I feel this need, I got to put this out there. That's basically what it came to.
And one thing that I really took away, Rob, was I know that survival skills gets all the attention, but preparation is what actually keeps people alive. And I was looking at my pack list the other day, and so much of it is kind of not fear-based, but like survivor-based, where like it could just take me a few minutes, if not an hour, to kind of prep everything and make sure everything is in working order before hitting out the trails. But for me, it's been kind of like an afterthought, is I have all these things in case things go astray. But, the key might be just making sure everything is in working order and everything is that you're prepared when you do go out into the wilderness. Why do you think a lot of hikers focus on the wrong end of the problem?
I think it's two things. Number one, survival is sexy. It's an exciting subject and it's exciting to watch, like, wow, they got themselves in a really bad situation. What are they going to do to get out of that one? Or, wow, the guy had a paper clip and a maple leaf and he built a condominium. My God, like all these things, you're like, wow, it's just fascinating, right? I'm using a parallel here, but that's kind of like why all the cop shows get so much ratings. People want to see like other people getting into trouble and what are they going to do? Are they going to run? Are they going to just, put their hands up? Whatever. Preparation is kind of mundane. It's boring. It would be like in the cops show example, it would be as exciting as watching a show about people who obey the law. And how exciting is that? It's just not terribly exciting. So it's not talked about much. But it's not written about much either. So I think number one, it's not terribly sexy, and it's not really terribly popularized. I mean, if you scroll through your Instagram and go through your hiker peeps and everything else, what pictures do you see? You see the destination, the smiles, maybe the sweat on their face or whatever. But that's kind of what's really more popularized. It doesn't really depict what it takes to get to the destination and, more importantly, back to the trailhead. And so if it's overlooked, then many people who are especially ones who are jumping into hiking, which is happening in incredible numbers, that is what drives them, is the destination and not necessarily the return. And so I think it's a part of, pop culture and, how social media direction is going. And, but I think none of us wants to be, on a cop show episode, and none of us wants to be the subject of a mountain rescue. And so what does it take not to be arrested? You follow the law. What does it take not to be, rescued by a mountain rescue system? And certainly there's some things you can't prevent, but you do your prevention. You do everything you need to do. You take care of the variables that you can at least control. I bring a knife, I bring something for fire, I bring tinder, I bring some type of, tarp or whatever for shelter building, everything else, hoping never, ever, ever to use it. But I don't know. I might be the most prepared guy out there, but something might happen out of left field. I might roll an ankle and I can't walk. I might, fall down and break my femur or, what have you. So I come prepared for that too, but I got it buttoned up, all the things that at least I can control.
Yeah, that's very true. I feel like most people that have been hiking for some time have those moments where it could have gone left, whether it was traversing a snowfield or going over blowdowns. It could just be a freak accident that could harm you or cause injury. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what's been the biggest misconception hikers have had about being prepared on trail?
I think because it's not really been written about until this book, well, number one, preparation is just this sort of mysterious subject. Like, where do I start? What do I do? What do I prepare for? And number one. And number two, I think, let's take hydration strategy, for instance. Until this book was written, nobody's really guided on how to calculate how much water you're actually going to need for that hike. This is the first book that ever does that. Before that, any article that is written on dehydration ends with bring water or bring enough water. But the open-ended question is, how much is that? And the answer is, it depends. It's very personal. It's very tied to the environment and the actual trail, the actual hike that you're doing. And so that's why there's, 4 or 5 variables in there that in the book that I have that table. You just plug all that stuff in and boom, you got your thing. Other people start with I'll bring a half a liter for every mile I'm going, which is fine. Is that no elevation mile? Is that a all uphill mile? Those are 2 very different miles. But if you're going to go with something simpler, 500 ml per mile, fine. But I think the misconception is there that, that's the rule, and not thinking to challenge, how did that work out for me? How did that, where did I go right or wrong on that? And always wanting to do better on that. Just say, wow, I barely got back to the trailhead. My mouth was dry. It was dragging ass, and I barely made it. But next time you go out, are you still going to do that 500 ml per mile, or are you going to think to maybe I should bump it up to 750? Different things like that, and that's fine. But never stick with a plan that ain't working. Is probably the biggest misconception.
Oh, I love that hydration example because I've been there. There's been moments where I won't need that much water. And then I end up getting back to the trailhead, not severely dehydrated, but enough where it's I should bring more. And it is that fine balance of bringing too much, bringing not enough. And I love that the book helps you calculate what you potentially might need on the trail. And I think another great thing that the book focuses on is on a handful of everyday pitfalls rather than the extreme scenarios. Why are common mistakes more dangerous than the rare ones?
Probably because they're overlooked, I would think. In conversations, oh yeah, you write a book and everything else. Well, what about bear attacks? And so people are really nervous about bear attacks and snakes and stuff. But the wildlife interactions that go bad are very rare, but they're the things that, if it makes it to the news once in a year, everybody gets all crazy about it. They're looking, crap, you can't run into a bear and just totally miss their hydration needs and just their basic stuff. It's going to be, below zero at going towards the summit above the tree line, and we're wearing t-shirts and shorts looking out for bear. And so I think a lot of the more important and more common needs that we need to maintain life are probably overlooked because they're kind of taken for granted. And I think the more sensationalized, again, bear and snake stuff is just probably overemphasized, overpopularized.
Kind of going back to dehydration and hydration, Rob, I think for me, the moments where I have noticed that I should have brought more water, by the time I realized that I was starting to get dehydrated, it was kind of a little bit too late. What are some early signs of dehydration that hikers often ignore until it's too late?
early sign of dehydration would be just kind of mental cloudiness, change in demeanor, just going from like total chill dude to like the Snickers commercial with Joe Pesci turns into Betty White. Just changing of the personality a little bit, little sluggish on the physical end, just kind of falling behind. Those are the subtleties. Now, it only takes 2% of total body water loss to enter into the mild dehydration category. So it takes very, very little water loss to get there. By the time that becomes recognizable, the horse is not only out of the barn, it's a mile down the road. But it's looking for those subtleties, those little changes we need to pay attention to in ourselves or somebody else. If you're like, dude, what's wrong with you, man? You're totally chill this morning. You're like, not yourself. Just hydrate, man. Hydrate. If it's hot, if it's, wherever it's obviously, a hydration issue.
Rob, one thing your book focuses on are the 5 variables every hiker needs to understand and control. Can you walk us through what those 5 variables are? And in your opinion, which one of them do experienced hikers still underestimate the most?
It's a great question. So the 5 are, so we'll go with dehydration again. The second would be maintenance of body temperature, which includes hypothermia and heat illness, like heat exhaustion and heat stroke, falling, drowning, and getting lost. And so they're all equally important. Which would be the most overlooked? I'm a big hydration guy, so definitely I think that is one because there's not a lot of information out there. It's not anybody's fault. It's not out there. And that was the part of my moral obligation was to get some information out there that people could start with and wrap their head around. Number one. And number two, I think land navigation is a very overlooked sort of skill. We're in information, an electronic age, and you pull out a analog compass and a map, and they'll laugh you out of the park. But going electronic only is what many people do, and they come to rely on that, which is fine, I guess, if it's working, but batteries go to the outdoors to die, number one. So if you're going to go electronic, bring that battery bank with you. Yeah, it's heavy, but when you run out of battery and you need to look at that map, that All Trails map you downloaded, you're going to be real sorry you didn't bring it. And number two, phones drop, they break, they may have to cross the river, you fall on your knees and it's underwater and you're done. So a lot of different things, or they might drop over a cliff or something like that, and you don't have that phone anymore. Now what? And so definitely always have an analog backup. It may be antiquated, but it will never, ever fail.
Another thing that you kind of already touched on is land navigation is an important skill a hiker needs to learn. Why does getting lost compound every other risk?
Right. So, just imagine the last hike you did. You brought X amount of water, snacks. You brought maybe an extra mid with you or a shell or something like that. Maybe carrying a 25 to 30 liter capacity pack on you. And you got enough to get you through that anticipated hike and the weather that was involved that you expected and everything else. Now you're lost. You don't know where you are. You're spending the night. The sun's gone down. You're spending the night. Now you're going to run out of water. You will have eaten your last snack about 4 hours ago. You didn't bring enough for shelter maybe, or don't have enough light to even gather things to make shelter. And so now you are maybe out of water and not anywhere near a source for water, out of food, maybe SOL on the shelter aspect, underdressed, exposed to either cold weather overnight, and now, at risk for hypothermia, or maybe it's hot AF. Maybe you're in Death Valley National Park. After nightfall, it'll probably get extraordinarily cold too. So if you were dressed for hot and it becomes cold overnight in a desert environment, or it just stays hot, either way, your body temperature will go into its own aberration depending on that environment they're now stuck in. You're now more exposed to, and without the food to make calories with, then that compounds everything. And so it's just like a just compounding mess. So getting lost, I would say, out of those 5 variables, it is the most important of them to nail down, to absolutely make sure, come hell or high water, I am getting out of there. I'll know exactly where I am at all times. You can argue, does that take away from the experience? We go out there to escape society, to escape all the thought and everything else we have to do during our daily lives to earn a living and everything else. We want to use that as an escape. But so, why should I like pay attention to where I am and all that stuff? But I'm telling you, the moment that you're convinced that you are lost, all that goes away. All that, you won't enjoy the birds singing then. You won't enjoy the little leaves and all the nice sounds in the distance and everything else. You go into survival mode and you're like scared to death. So how badly do you not want to get stuck out there? What are you willing to do before and on trail while still enjoying? As much as I reference the paper map probably every few hundred yards or so. And everything that is notable that I pass, whether it's a lake, whether it's a peak, whether it's a stream was following the trail to my left, let's say, and then all of a sudden it veers away from the trail. Where am I? Where on the map does it veer away from the trail? Okay, so I'm right here. Okay. And so later on, if I happen to walk off trail, I happen to follow somebody else's bio break trail instead of the real one. And I'm like, oh shit, where am I? All right, so I was right there where the creek went away from the trail. Okay, so that was there, no more than 15 minutes away from there, so I can't be. All right, so I got to go back. So if you always knew where you were every so often, you'll know where you've been and where you got to get back to. And it's much easier to get back to the trail, having known that, rather than rely on a little green arrow through a blue trail on your phone screen. Again, battery might die, and then you're like, oh shit, where do I go now? And so I do pay attention, but in between those map checks, I'm enjoying all the things as well. And so I think I've achieved that balance, and anyone can.
And I mean, I'll be the first one to admit, Rob, when I went on my first backpacking trip, I downloaded the REI backpacking checklist, saw that, navigation, compass, and a map was required. And I bought a compass and a map, but really didn't have any idea how to properly use it. For folks like me, or maybe others who are intimidated by maps and compasses, what's the best way to kind of start building confidence using them?
With anything else, you start small. And I tried to write the map and compass section of the land navigation chapter such that, you can use either an orienteering compass, which is a lot lighter for the ultralight folks, or the tank-like lensatic compass. And so the skills are a little different between the two. But I tried to just walk you through just familiarity. Which way is up on a map? I don't know. Well, if you can read the big letters on the map and they're upright, you're holding the map right. So there's a lot of little things out there. The person's like circularly turning the map, quarter turn every time. I don't know what the hell's going on here. And the compass as well. But knowing how to orient the map to the terrain. And so I walk through all those simple things and I build on those skills through that chapter. And so I think the most important thing is the declination. And this declination, if you read the chapter, is sort of like the Rosetta Stone that translates what the map is calling north and what your compass is calling north. And, some people who don't know these analog things are like, wait a minute, what? There's two norths? And yes, there are. There's the north that humans created, called the North Pole, and then there's the north that the Earth created, which is the magnetic north, and they are not in the same place. And so while your map points to the human north, your compass doesn't care what the map says. It's pointing to the magnetic north. And on our map, we have the simple Rosetta Stone that shows us where the magnetic north is in comparison to where the map is calling north. And where you are in the Pacific Northwest, Ivan, your declination, it's always going to be off to the right, off to the east. You're tucked all the way up there. And it's actually a big change, off from what the map is calling north. It's going to be a good 15 to 20 degrees off of what your map is calling north. So as long as you can put that correcting factor, which I do describe in the book, then your map and compass are speaking the same language. And you start there, and then you're like, okay, and then let me get a bearing. Hey, I see that, that peak, maybe Mount Rainier in the distance. What bearing is that? And you just do these simple things, just getting comfortable with that and realizing there's a 360-degree circle around you at all times. And what degree is where, it all depends on where you are and where you're headed. But north, the 0 degree north on that imaginary compass that surrounds you will always point to the same place. It's just you may be walking it west to 270 degrees or east to 90 degrees. And so if you realize that, okay, I get this now, you get a little bit more familiar with it and you're like, hey, yeah, this isn't so bad. And just really working up and slowly and just working through those skills. Hopefully I've worded it such that others can understand it. I worded it so that I understand it. So I'm hoping that others will as well.
Now, kind of switching gears on things that are out of our control. For me, I constantly check the forecast days, if not, weeks in advance to where I'm going. And being in a mountainous region, the mountains make their own weather. And even though the forecast has stayed the same for multiple days, when you get out there, it could throw you a curveball. How often, in your opinion, do rescues happen because people do trust the forecast too much?
I don't have an exact answer for you, but I have a feeling it's a lot more common than we believe it is. In the book, I use the example of Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And if you look at the forecast for that area, it will give you the forecast of Estes Park, which is the town right outside of that park. And that is at around, it escapes me now, around 8,000 feet elevation, give or take. But if you're going up to elevation, you're going up to 10,000, 10,500, 11, maybe, hitting a 14er in that same area, whole other set of weather. I do put in references for, websites that can give you the forecasts at those elevations that you anticipate to reach, and it will give you a separate forecast than what it gives for, let's say, Estes Park in that example. And I think that's really the big difference, and that will set people apart. And I commonly speak about this one first 14er I went to. It was Mount Evans at the time, is now Mount Blue Sky outside of Denver. And it was first week of August. And had I not known any better, I would have started out in t-shirt and shorts, because it was like upper 70s that day, up to 82 or something like that. And first week of August, right? You get to the top and it's snowing. First week of August. So people from out of town, like I was at the time, but I knew better, they would come in t-shirt and shorts and be caught in a snowstorm if they got up that high. And people who come from elsewhere especially fall into that trap, I think, all the time.
I've fallen into that trap many times, especially when I lived in Arizona, dealing with knowing that it's warm during the day, but the desert just loses all its heat at night, and thinking that I could be in shorts and a t-shirt and try to do an afternoon or evening hike, and realizing that it quickly gets cold out there. From a medical perspective, why do hypothermia or heat illnesses escalate so fast on the trail?
Yeah, and it's funny. I mentioned earlier the early signs of dehydration, which also happen to be shared with hypothermia and heat illness. So it starts out all the same, just real subtle stuff. And it's cloudy mentation, change in demeanor, sluggish physically, just not right. And you could blame that on a million and one things. Oh, it means the altitude, or, I had had a pork sausage for breakfast. Ugh, maybe it's just not hitting me right, or whatever, bad coffee, any one of different things. And like I said, for dehydration, once it becomes obvious, the horse is out of the barn and a mile down the road. So you're already deep in it by the time you realize what's going on. Recently there was a boyfriend and girlfriend who were in, I believe it was Austria, and they set out in the afternoon of all times to go and pursue this summit in Austria. I think it was one of the top two summits in Austria, and they were there well past sundown. I think it was like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, something like that. And she just can't go any further. He panics. He thinks of himself first, runs the hell down that mountain. Happens to pass by a ranger station. Hey, there's a girl up there, and runs home and cries to mommy. But he may have pushed her past the subtle signs that was like, hey, there's something wrong here, something not quite right, not keeping up. Like, come on, and pushing until she was just so deep in it she could not even move. And I think that was a really bad circumstance all around. I didn't hear follow up on that. What happened to him? As I think the police were pursuing him. I don't know what the laws are in Austria, but anyway, her life could have been spared had they known, number one, the subtle signs of hypothermia, and number two, had the humility to say, you know what, maybe tonight ain't the time to do it. Maybe we tackle this another time. We go way earlier in the day and tackle this while the sun is still up, while it's still a little warm, and maybe come a little better, prepared for this. And so I think those two things were missing. Get back to your question, and I think, once it becomes recognizable, it's almost untenable, and it may be just simply time to call for rescue rather than try to undo something that's just way out of the ballpark already.
Now, one thing, Rob, that I think a lot of us that enjoy the outdoors love being next to water sources, whether it's for drinking, for just a moment of zen, whether it's a creek, river, lake. And I do say water is beautiful, but you call it one of nature's most common traps. And I'm wondering if you can share with the listeners, why is unbuckling pack straps during crossing such a critical detail?
Absolutely. Yeah. So crossing mountain streams is one of the most treacherous things for hikers and backpackers. The great unknown is how deep is this? And a lot of times you don't know until you're in it, and you really don't get a great appreciation of the hydraulic force that's coming at you until you're more than knee deep in a roiling river or stream or whatever. The word creek just sounds too like little and weak to me, but there's nomenclature for this. But creeks will knock you the hell over, and logs will turn logs over, and boulders, and with enough snow melt falling from up top. So if you happen to be one of those unfortunate individuals who does get toppled, number one, you are completely off balance with all this weight on your back. The pack will fill up instantly, soak everything in there, and weigh you down. It is absolute panic, number one. Number two, it is cold as hell. And so you immediately get this like cold plunge kind of effect. And the last thing you need to be doing is messing around with your buckles and trying to undo that in amongst trying to keep your head above water, trying to deal with you're smacking into, branches and boulders and all kinds of different, what are called strainers underneath the level of the water. So it won't be like you jump in the pool and you have time to just like, all right, let me just mess around with this thing and get it off. No, you want to like ditch that pack in like, quarter second flat. And so the best way to do it is already have the complex stuff undone so that all you got to do is just shimmy out of that thing and just let it go. I don't care what's in there. Let it go. That's a very, 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 very important step in the skill to properly walk across these streams.
Now, you spent a lot of time in wild places, and I'm wondering how spending time in the outdoors and in wilderness situations has changed how you approach your work as a physician.
Probably only has impacted my appreciation for having access to a lot of what I need to figure out what's going on. I'm board certified in 4 different specialties, but most of what I do is critical care medicine, which is intensive care unit work. And for those of you who don't know, the critical care doctor is the doctor that other doctors ask to see and help them save their patients' lives. They may have had surgery, or they were admitted with pneumonia or some type of infection or what have you, and things are not going well. They're clearly dying. We are the docs who are asked to come in and undo that process. So it is best to see what has been done, evaluate, the lab work, the x-rays, and go with your gut sometimes, but never hang your hat on any one thing. Always question what you evaluated and what you were thinking. And always challenge that, because you could be wrong. A lot of things fit other things, and you don't want to distract yourself with extraneous information. I do not envy the ER docs who have a much harder job than me. They may not see as many densely, most people I see are highly sick. So not everybody they see are that sick. But when they have a sick patient, they're walking into a room, they got nothing. They got no lab work, no x-rays, no nothing. And they got to figure out from, right from the start. And they got to, take all the right approaches. Certainly my association with the Wilderness Medical Society and knowing how austere things can get. And so I just really more appreciate walking into a situation where I have information that I can draw on. I may need to do more, but I can at least start with something, and I'm absolutely grateful for that. That's probably the only way it's really impacted me. But going out into the wild, and it does definitely de-stress me. So it allows me to come back with a fresher mind, fresher perspective, and a lot more rested.
Now, one thing that I think I've noticed in my own personal experience and seeing it in others that are starting out in their outdoor journey is there's that sense of fear of being out in the outdoors, especially if you're doing solo hikes. And I found it very interesting that you said one of your biggest fears is dying out there in the outdoors from something preventable. How have you been able to balance that fear with the freedom that the outdoors gives you?
Yeah, so I think I was mentioning before, I'm trying to balance the need to stay out of trouble with that need to decompress, and I guess out of necessity for both, I try to force that balance. Certainly, solo hiking is definitely a lot more stressful. You're a group of one with the collective skills of a group of one, as opposed to going with 4 or 5 other people. That person might be better with compass and map than I am, and that person over there is really good at, this and that and the other thing. And generally groups have a much better time because the conversation and everything else, but it can distract you from observing and being observant, like I was saying before, with say the paper map and the creek running away from the trail, and like, where am I on the map here? Where that creek runs away? Oh, yeah, here I am. If you're lost in conversation or yapping or joking around about something, you can completely miss all that stuff. Solo hiking is also extremely stressful for our female counterparts for, reasons I don't have to state. It can be a very, very stressful situation for many who get out there, and looking out for yourself, looking out at others, making sure, don't worry about the bears, it's the creepo who's, like 10 paces behind you, that kind of thing, and trying to get your wilderness on, if you will, in amongst all that can be difficult. And the hiker crowd is more kind of like a not hippie crowd, but we have that little streak in us. We like to let go and just be free and all that stuff. We definitely have a lot of folks in the community who are like that, and that's awesome. I think that's an amazing mindset to have. But we can't let go of it all, because then we may forget where we are or completely lose the trail, and then we're like, oh shit, then the fun just completely ceases. I think that's probably a balance that probably most people have to figure out, maybe letting go of a little bit of the fear. And certainly my fear factor goes down quite a bit if I prepare well. Like, I'm doing everything I can, and yeah, a bear might come along and find me real tasty, and that's the end of me. But I couldn't really prevent that. But it would be extra tragic if I were to die from something that I could have easily prevented outright. And so as long as I got those things covered, I'm usually good to go. And just maintain just that little bit of attention as to where I am, what am I looking at, where's the sun, that kind of thing as well. I'm big on following the sun, and as a means for following direction. That's also in the book. So I use those things to sort of kind of secure myself and to reassure myself, and then I can move on, and I can enjoy where I am until the next little thing I have to check on.
Now, Rob, one of the regular segments we like to do on the podcast is do a deep dive into our guest Instagram feed and highlight a specific post or reel. And I knew I had to ask you about this one because as of right now, it's still one of the most beautiful places I've seen in real life, and that's Banff in Alberta, Canada. And you were able to do a 5-day backpacking trip in parts of Banff that most people never see. You wrote about setting an ambitious challenge, carrying a heavier pack than usual, and realizing you used nearly everything you brought. You also said, put the time into prep well to avoid the effort of overcoming unpreparedness. Can you walk us through how you approach preparation for that trip, especially balancing the weight versus readiness, and what that experience reinforced for you about why preparation matters so much in the backcountry?
It's interesting when you transition from day hiking, where, by the odds, if you don't prepare well, you might turn out just fine. Backpacking, it is so unforgiving. You're 3 days out and you run out of X, there's no going to the store to pick up whatever, you got what you got. And so you better have a way to replace that or, bring it all with you. First of all, the map. So first, water. How often are we going to be interacting with water? I made sure I found a loop that we were going to hit water multiple times per day, every day. And so that was like, okay, so I'm going to bring enough capacity for all the water I'm going to need, but I'm not going to have to, obviously, I can't bring 5 days of water needs with me. So I definitely have to have a means for filtering that, purifying it. I nailed that down. Now, food. How many calories am I going to have to bring? How much can I stuff into this bear vault? I'm going to need snacks. And it's all guesswork, unless you regularly backpack all the time, you don't know. I'm going to burn an F ton of calories here. How do I replace that so I don't run out of gas? And so having the meals down, the snacks, the incidentals that you may want to just nibble on. And then there's, the tent, the shelter. Now the weather, how am I going to dress each day? What am I going to bring? And so I'm a person who enjoys a good process. And, when it comes to coffee, I do not like to step up to a Keurig and press a button and get a cup of coffee. I do pour over coffee. I do it the hard way. And one of my big hobbies is long range precision shooting. Love it because it's you against all the scientific elements that prevent that bullet hitting the target, 800 yards away. And so accounting for all the physics and the chemistry and the wind, the temperature, all that stuff, I love that. And so I like to dive deep into those nitty gritty details. And so the backpacking really, prepping for all that, just going through, what am I going to need? What am I going to need? What am I going to need for this? How's that going to work out? And how do I keep the weight down that I don't, I'm not out of gas 100 yards from the trailhead, and it was probably a few months of going through all the variables and trying to envision how it was going to turn out, not really knowing how it was going to turn out in real time. But I rationed out the food and the snacks, for each day and all that stuff. It was just very meticulous. And that, I guess that was probably the one word that I should probably use in here. I'm sure you've done plenty of backpacking yourself, and you got to get meticulous about these things. Otherwise, you're going to be sorry or malnourished or, whatever you're going to be. But that was really how do I do this better? How do I do it lighter while still not cheating myself on this? And, finding the lightweight tent, a warm enough sleeping bag, but, it's not like lead filled. It was actually, that was a fun trip to plan for and to accomplish. And then, so all the logistics and everything else. I loved the whole process.
Well, that was it, Rob, for your episode questions. These last couple questions are questions that we like to ask all our guests. The first one is regular summit routines, or maybe it's an end of the hike routine for you. But is there something that you do on a regular basis when you're on trail or at the end of a hike? For a lot of us, it's maybe just packing that favorite snack or drink. For others, it's enjoying a moment of zen. And then for a lot of us, it's enjoying that favorite meal afterwards. Is there a regular custom or routine that you like to do when you reach your destination or when you make it back out?
My little routine it's not so personal that I won't say it, but it's more on a personal level. I lost my mom in 2019, and the circumstances were that I didn't time it well. She was 1,200 miles away and didn't see the end coming, and I wasn't there. And so the only thing that, my sister wanted all of her jewelry and everything else, but I found this one thing was it was a silver pendant that was my grandfather's that my mother had in her jewelry box. And I took that and I wear it most days and when I go hiking. So whenever I get to the summit, I usually just hold on to it and talk to my mom. And that's my routine. As I'm looking out at these beautiful things that she'd probably yell at me for trying to accomplish. But, that's the way I somehow feel closer to her. So, and maybe trying to make up for that inability to have gotten there at the end, held her hand until the afterlife.
I really love the way that you are able to connect with your mom with that pendant in your outdoor experiences. And that's a great way to remember. That's really beautiful. Now, Rob, you've talked about how you're meticulous when it comes to your pack list and preparedness. But I'm wondering, for you, is there a luxury item that you tend to pack that falls outside of the essentials?
I'm a sucker for a good stroop waffle. That's probably about it. I don't have any teddy bears or anything else that I cuddle with in the sleeping bag or anything else. But there's nothing more satisfying on trail than a stroop waffle, I have to say.
Are those stinger ones that you can get, the smaller ones, or?
Yeah, there's Stinger ones. There's a bunch of name brands. There's Three Brothers, I think. There's one. There's a bunch of them, but they're just like, I don't know, like thin, round, waffle shaped goodness. All kinds of different flavors and stuff. So I'm a sucker for a good one.
We're at the beginning of 2026 when we're recording this. There's still plenty of time to plan out your 2026 hiking goals, but is there any hiking or travel goals that you have for 2026 or anything exciting on the horizon that we should look out for?
So actually I had originally signed up for a trip to Nepal to do I think it's like a 7-day or so hike up to Everest Base Camp. No, not a summit bid, but it's just a base camp. I backed out of that trip is for this and that. But I may want to do that again. I may want to reboot that effort, but at a later date. But what I'm going to do instead, I want to do something in February. Where can you go in February and assure yourself you can actually land there and get out and not be held back by weather? So we're going to head out to San Diego and see what the hiking looks like out there. I've been out there a couple of times for non-hiking reasons, so it's just a great little place to be. So I'll check that out. I am going to try to get down to the Phoenix area or out to the Phoenix area as well at some point, maybe in the spring. I really want to try Montana this summer, though. I don't know if I'll be able to get into Glacier. It's a tough to get the access, but I would love to get into just see Montana. I've done Idaho and Wyoming. I'd love to see Montana.
Well, that was it for those questions, Rob. This last section of the podcast is the this or that questions. We're going to give you some hiking related topics, and you just choose which one you prefer out of the two. You're more than welcome to say neither or both, and feel free to elaborate on your decision if you like. But the first one is, if you had to choose, would you prefer ascending or descending?
Ascending. It's that anticipation of what am I going to see at the end of all this suffering.
Now, I think I know the answer to this one, but waterfalls or summits?
Oh my God. Love them both, but I'd say summits a little bit more than waterfalls.
And then in order to reach those summits, say you got to the trailhead, there's 2 hiking routes. There's one with a bunch of switchbacks, and then there's a more direct route that just takes you straight up. If you had to choose, would you choose switchbacks or straight up?
So basically East Coast hiking or West Coast hiking?
Right.
I choose switchbacks.
I never even thought of it like that, but very true. PCT versus the AT, straight up or switchbacks.
Oh my God. But, East Coast hiking was, I guess trails were built way before the West Coast was. And so they're like, okay, up there, yeah, that's the summit right there. Okay, this is the trail. We're right up there. And the West is more influenced by European hiking trails where they were a lot better thought out and a lot better designed. And so I definitely switchbacks.
And then our most controversial one, trek poles or freehand?
Oh, freehand. I've got an off-color joke about trekking poles, and I won't say it on here, but yeah, freehand, definitely.
And then this next one is about footwear. Are you using traditional hiking boots or trail runners?
I'm a boots guy.
This is one of the tougher ones, but if you had to choose a trail system, would you choose a loop trail or an out and back trail?
I like loops better. No matter where you are, you're seeing something you hadn't seen before.
And then these next couple ones are even harder, but if you had to choose sunset hikes or sunrise hikes?
Sunrise.
And then this one's equally tough, spring wildflowers or fall colors?
Fall colors.
And we talked about hydration on this episode, but when it comes to your water carrying system, do you use a water bladder or a water bottle?
I'm definitely a bottles guy. Bladders are just so fraught with difficulty. Can't dry them out. They get a little moldy if you haven't used them in a while. Oh my God, what a pain. But yeah, definitely bottles.
And then the last one, you kind of answered it already, but when it comes to your summit routine, do you like a summit snack or a summit drink?
I'm going with both on that. Definitely got to reward yourself. Not doing the summit beer thing, but, take a good drink, electrolytes, reward yourself for all that suffering, and then look at the view, kiss mom goodbye, and get back down.
Well, that was it, Rob, for the this or that questions. For folks that want to follow your journey online, where are some of the places they can follow you at? And then where are some of the places that they can grab your book, Surviving the Trail?
I'm primarily on Instagram and, doing this doctor gig. There are times when, the volume of patients is lower and the energy level is higher, and I can actually, record stuff worth looking at. And there's two accounts I have, Dr. Rob Scanlon and Surviving the Trail. I generally will post to both, but occasionally Surviving the Trail will get its own little thing. Now, as far as where to find the book, we're working on that. So it launched in September of 25, and it's everywhere online. That's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, you name it. Even your favorite, independent bookstore, either online access, they've got it. They may not have it in stock, but they'll get it. And so anywhere online. What I'm trying to push, our publisher to do is to get it more places on the shelf, and especially where hikers go. So I'm really focusing in on national park visitor centers, because it needs to be on those shelves. And I'm working on libraries and REI, maybe. We'll see. Barnes & Noble on the shelf would be amazing. Books A Million on the shelf would be amazing. So hopefully we'll get there, and hopefully the spring will open up some opportunities for the publisher to get that stuff on there. We launched in the fall, so all of the year's catalog for all these retailers already picked at the beginning of the year. So we kind of missed out on all that. So hopefully we get it on the shelf in a lot of places in this year. That would be helpful. The purpose of this book is to make an impact, on the statistics that I quoted at the beginning of the podcast. And it's not about making money. Authors make about $1 a book. That's it. It's not a money thing. I want to make an impact. I want to help people help themselves. I want to empower people to mitigate their risk of falling into these common traps that they can control. And that is all that this is about. And so hopefully people will embrace this well and tell a friend about it or gift them with this, because it's extraordinarily important stuff.
Really, you've done a great service to the hiking community by putting this book out. And like you said, for those folks that are just starting out, it's a great gift to give. But then also for experienced hikers, there's a lot of stuff that you can pick up that you might be overlooking on your preparedness. So thank you so much, Rob, for coming on the podcast. We'll definitely link your social media handles on the episode show notes, as well as where they can find Surviving the Trail. But appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to speak with us.
I thank you so much for having me on, Ivan.
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Dr. Rob Scanlon. We extend a heartfelt thanks to him for joining us on the podcast. Be sure to follow him on Instagram at Dr._Rob Scanlon. And be sure to check out the episode show notes to learn more about his book, Surviving the Trail. This episode of Hikes and Mics was produced by Jordan Smith. Be sure to follow her adventures on Instagram at jordan.journeys. New episodes will drop every Monday throughout the winter hiking season, with the occasional Friday bonus episodes along the way. To make sure you never miss out a moment of these inspiring trail stories, hit that follow or subscribe button. Your support truly keeps the community going through every season. Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. That's where you'll find behind-the-scenes episode visuals, my own winter hiking adventures, and plenty more to keep the cold weather stoke alive. As we wrap up today's journey, remember, even when the trails are quiet and the mountains are blanketed in snow, the spirit of adventure is still very much alive. So tread those happy trails, stay warm out there, and keep exploring. Until next time, my fellow hikers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow along with him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade. It's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.